You gotta pack up your tent and ride. Pack up your tent and ride. Good grub cooking on a fire tonight. Pack up your tent and ride.
Hi, I'm Fraser Douglas, and I was an avid tent camper for over 55 years. On many of our camping trips, I like to prepare great tasting meals, and in order to prepare those meals, I had to have a good, sharp, all-purpose camp kitchen knife. And so I decided in this video to tell you how I find a good purpose camp kitchen knife and how I keep it sharp. I hope you'll find something of interest in this video. Let me begin this discussion by stating the obvious. It is much more practical to have one or two knives in your kitchen that can perform all of your food prep chores rather than a drawer full of knives that are each designed for a specific task. Now, despite the fact that this statement seems so obvious today, for about 50 years of my life, I was brainwashed by professional cooks into thinking that I had to buy 5 or 10 different specialty knives to be able to cook a few basic meals. Chef knife, bread knives, butcher knives, fruit knives, paring knives, steak knives, and so on. But when I started camping, I realized I didn't have room to pack a whole bunch of different kitchen knives. And so I began looking for one knife that could perform all of our food prep chores. After a short time, I realized that it would also be nice just to have one or two all-purpose knives in our home kitchen. So over the past 20 or so years, I have used more than 50 different knives to prepare our meals and have compiled a list of 10 features which I believe are essential for making a good all-purpose food prep knife. For example, I believe that most families should buy a kitchen knife made with a stainless steel because stainless steel knives are so much easier to maintain than carbon steel knives. Now, many professional cooks prefer to use a carbon steel knife because it's easier to keep that edge super sharp with the hone while they're cooking. But carbon steel knives must be rinsed and dried immediately after each use to prevent rust from developing. A second important feature of an all-purpose food prep knife is that it should be smaller than a chef knife, so that it can be easily packed with your other kitchen utensils and safely used when you're cutting a variety of different foods. But it should be larger than a paring knife so that you can cut large and dense foods. In other words, it should be about 10 inches long. I also believe that a good all-purpose food prep knife needs to have a sharp point because you need to insert this point in order to cut large foods such as melons and cabbages. This knife should also have a straight edge rather than a serrated edge because a straight edge is so much easier to keep sharp. Serrated edges, on the other hand, will get dull, and when they do, you might as well just throw them away because they're so difficult and expensive to resharpen. I believe that the blade should be approximately 5 inches long and viewed as having two halves. The back half, or rear edge, should be about 1¼ inches wide and used for chopping and mincing vegetables. The front half, or forward edge, or belly, should be curved from the rear edge up to the point. And this will be used primarily for slicing. Now, I have a couple of other essential features, so you may want to pause this video and check them out also. In addition to those 10 essential features, I've also compiled a list of 12 more desirable features. So you may want to pause the video again to read them. Most importantly, although good quality kitchen knives frequently cost more than $100, you can find knives that will make great all-purpose kitchen knives for less than $50. For example, I bought this Sabatier small chef knife on eBay for $25 plus $6 shipping. So, how can you assess the sharpness of your kitchen knife? Well, you could buy a Best knife sharpening test machine, but it's expensive and most family cooks really don't need one. Instead, you could just cut a ripe tomato and you should get a pretty good idea how sharp your knife is. To assess the sharpness of the forward edge or belly, place it onto a ripe tomato and gradually increase the pressure until it slices through the tomato. It's important to gradually increase the pressure without sawing back and forth. If the belly easily slices through the tomato, then it's pretty sharp. But if it takes a lot of pressure and perhaps can't even cut through the tomato, then it's very dull. To illustrate this point, let me show you how 3 different knives having varying degrees of sharpness can cut a ripe tomato. First is my favorite kitchen knife made by Bill Bullard. It is super sharp and requires very little pressure to slice through the tomato. Next is this very dull knife that was made for our grandson, also by Bill Bullard. This knife has never been sharpened, but it can cut soft foods using the point and the belly. And finally is this medium sharp knife that my wife likes to use. It can slice through the tomato, but it takes more effort than the very sharp knife. After assessing the sharpness of the forward edge, repeat the process to assess the sharpness of the rear edge. Being mindful of this simple procedure, I suggest that you can think of knives as having 4 levels of sharpness. And I try to keep my favorite kitchen knife at that highest super sharp level. So why should we keep our kitchen knife super sharp? No matter what food you want to cut, be it fresh baked bread, a large pork or beef roast, the peel of a pineapple, a sweet potato, a head of cabbage, or a soft tomato, a sharp knife will easily cut through that food with very little effort. And when you can slice or chop through food with very little effort, then you can cut a lot of food without developing cramps or blisters or hot spots on your hand. Now let me explain how to sharpen your kitchen knife. When you first get a knife for your kitchen, you must use a relatively aggressive method to shave away small metal flakes from the edge to make sure that that edge is well sharpened to about a 19-degree angle. This is especially true if you buy a knife from a discount department store or a used knife from an antique shop. But you may be able to skip this step if you buy a high-quality knife from a professional cutlery store. The easiest way to put a sharp edge on your kitchen knife is to use a gadget such as this orange Ninja that allows you to dial in the exact angle that you want to put on your knife edge. With just a little pressure, pull the knife back past the coarse blades about a dozen times until it passes smoothly from the very back to the front. Then move to the fine edge front until it moves very smoothly through the blades. After you get a super sharp edge, then you should pass that edge across a hone about 5 times on each side in order to remove any burrs and get that edge standing tall. Then you should pass the edge across a strop about 5 times each side in order to polish it smooth. Now let's see how my wife's medium dull knife slices a tomato. If you're a traditionalist, you may want to try to sharpen your knife with a stone, but it takes a lot more time and is much more difficult. Once you get your knife sharp, you want to keep it as sharp as possible for as long as possible without having to use these aggressive methods again for 2 or 3 years. Now, some knives will hold that super sharp edge longer than others, but after preparing 2 or 3 meals, you'll need to rehone the edge about 10 times on each side and then restrop it again about 5 to 10 times on each side. To maintain that good sharp edge, always cut your food on a wood or bamboo cutting board rather than a glass, metal, or stone cutting board or countertop. Contrary to what you have heard all of your life, a super sharp knife is far more dangerous than a super dull knife. That's why we don't give super sharp knives to our children when they're first learning how to use a knife. Here is our grandson, Leo, practicing his knife cutting skills by cutting the Polish kielbasa for our lunch today with his very dull knife. So when you're using a super sharp knife, you need to focus your full attention on your food processing task and don't allow yourself to get distracted by other things going on around you. And don't try to imitate those professional chefs that cut an onion like a machine gun. Family cooks really don't need to cut their food rapidly, and if you get in a hurry, it's very easy to cut yourself. One important safety tip is if you are using a super sharp knife, always cut toward a cutting board and never cut toward your hand or your fingers. More specifically, never try to peel an apple or a potato with a super sharp knife because one slip and you could seriously injure yourself. And never use a super sharp knife after consuming alcohol, marijuana, or any other drug that could impair your coordination. In sum, I want to encourage you to buy a good knife for your camp kitchen, which can be used as an all-purpose food prep knife, and then put a super sharp edge on that knife. I think you'll be very pleased. And then, if you're like me, you'll want to do the same thing for your home kitchen. For more information about camp kitchen knives and outdoor cooking, please visit my website, moderntentcamping.com. And while you're there, visit my Amazon store where you'll find links to some great products.
Take more trips, travel further, visit more attractions, and spend less money. Go tent camping. Thanks for watching.